I should have seen the red flags, but when you've been married for 23 years, you don't look for red flags anymore. You look for routines, for habits, for the way she folds the napkins the same way every Sunday dinner. That night started like any other. My wife, Karen, stood at the head of the dining table, wine glass in hand. Her sister, Melissa, sat to my right. Our two adult kids were visiting. The room smelled like rosemary chicken and familiarity. Then Karen cleared her throat. I think we need to separate. The fork in my hand froze mid-air. No one laughed at first. I waited for her to smile, to say she was kidding, to roll her eyes and call it one of her dramatic moods. She didn't. My son blinked. My daughter stared at her plate. Melissa shifted in her chair, and I felt something strange settle in my chest, not panic. Clarity. After 2 decades, you know when something has been rehearsed. I leaned back in my chair, forced a half smile, and said lightly, "Well, if we're separating, maybe Melissa would like to move in." There it was. The line, the joke. Everyone laughed, too loudly. Melissa's cheeks turned pink. She ducked her head, pretending to sip her wine. Karen didn't laugh. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That's when everything changed. You know that feeling when the air shifts in a room, when something invisible cracks? I saw it, just for a second. A flicker of anger, not embarrassment. Anger. Dinner continued like nothing had happened. We talked about my son's job, about gas prices, about the neighbor's new fence. But under the table, Karen's knee wasn't touching mine like it usually did. When we cleaned up, she barely spoke to me. Melissa avoided eye contact, and I kept thinking, I thought it was a joke. But what if it wasn't? At 10:30 p.m., Karen went upstairs without saying goodnight. At 11:12 p.m., Melissa left. At 11:47 p.m., my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I almost didn't look, but something in my gut told me to check. I stared at the screen. Melissa, one unread message. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. 3 words. Is the offer... I swallowed. Still on? It wasn't a joke anymore, and that was the moment I realized the separation had already begun. I didn't answer right away. That's the first thing you need to understand. When you've been married more than 20 years, you learn that silence is sometimes more powerful than words. And at 11:47 p.m., staring at Melissa's message glowing in the dark, silence felt like the only thing keeping my pulse steady. Is the offer still on? 3 words, no emoji, no LOL, no explanation. I read it 5 times. I should have laughed. I should have typed back something harmless like, relax, it was a joke. But it didn't feel like a joke anymore. My stomach dropped in that slow, heavy way it does when you realize you've stepped into something you don't fully understand. Upstairs, I could hear Karen moving around, closet door sliding, drawer shutting harder than usual. I typed, deleted it, typed again, deleted it again. Because here's what no one tells you about long marriages. By the time someone says the word separate, they've already been gone for months. I thought back to the last few weeks, the extra gym sessions, the phone turning face down on the counter, the sudden interest in finding herself. Red flags I ignored because I didn't want to look paranoid at 52 years old. I stared at Melissa's name again. You won't believe what happened next, but instead of shutting it down, I asked a question. Why would you ask that? 3 dots appeared almost immediately. She'd been waiting. That didn't sound like a joke. My heart pounded in my ears. It wasn't. I typed before I could stop myself. The message showed as read. No response. 30 seconds passed. Then my phone buzzed again. She's been talking about leaving you for months. That's when everything shifted. Months? I sat up in bed. Months. I looked toward the bedroom door. Closed. Silent. I suddenly felt like the only person in my own house who didn't have the script. Talking to who? I typed. There was a longer pause this time. Long enough for doubt to creep in, then... me. I exhaled slowly, so this wasn't random. This wasn't flirting. This was information, and information is power. She met with a lawyer in April, Melissa wrote. She thinks you don't know. April. I did the math in my head. That was right after our anniversary dinner. The dinner where she cried and said she felt disconnected. Disconnected. I felt something colder than anger settle in. Strategy. I didn't accuse. I didn't explode. I didn't go upstairs. Instead, I typed the calmest sentence of my life. Thank you for telling me. 3 dots appeared again. Then, so, is the offer still on? This time it didn't read like a joke. It read like a test, or an opportunity. And that was the moment I realized something else. Melissa wasn't just informing me, she was choosing sides. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Karen was still awake, and for the first time in my marriage, I didn't feel blindsided. I felt alert, because if she had been planning an exit, maybe it was time I started planning too. I stared at the phone one more time. Then I sent the message that changed everything. Maybe we should talk. Melissa didn't hesitate. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. coffee? That alone told me everything. People who are unsure don't move that fast. I barely slept. Karen lay beside me facing the wall. No goodnight, no touch, no explanation, just distance. And for the first time in 23 years, I didn't reach for her. At 9:58 a.m., Melissa was already seated at the corner table of a quiet cafe across town. Sunglasses, phone face down, watching the door like someone waiting for a deal to close. When I sat down, she didn't smile. "She's serious," she said immediately. No small talk, no pretending. I stirred my coffee slowly. "About separating?" "She's been building an exit strategy." There it was again. Exit strategy, not emotional, strategic. Melissa leaned in. She opened a separate account in March. My stomach tightened. "Joint funds?" I asked calmly. Melissa nodded once. She transferred small amounts at a time, enough that you wouldn't notice, said it was for security. Security. I thought about all the times she'd handled the online banking because she said I hated dealing with it. I thought about how I trusted her. "She met with a divorce attorney in April," Melissa continued. "Consultation. She said she just wanted to know her options." April. That word again. April was when she insisted on repainting the bedroom, said she needed a fresh start. I should have seen it. I should have seen all of it. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally. Melissa held my gaze this time. "Because you deserve to know." It sounded noble, but something underneath it felt calculated. "You think she's having an affair?" I asked. Melissa hesitated. That hesitation spoke louder than any answer. "She's been texting someone," she said carefully. Late, smiling at her phone, guarding it. My pulse stayed steady, but inside, something cracked. Not rage, recognition. This wasn't emotional confusion. This was preparation. "She said once," Melissa continued softly, "that you'd never see it coming." I almost laughed at that, because here's the thing about long marriages. We don't expect betrayal from the person who knows where we keep our birth certificates. "She thinks she'll walk away with half and start over clean," Melissa added. Half. There it was, the real word, not separation. Assets. I leaned back in my chair. "I need proof," I said calmly. Melissa blinked. "Proof? If she's been moving money, meeting lawyers, planning quietly, I need something real." Melissa looked down at her phone, then she slid it across the table. A screenshot. A message from Karen 3 weeks ago. "Once this is done, I'll finally be free." Free. That word hit harder than I expected. Free from what? From me? Or from the life we built together? I looked up slowly. "She doesn't know I saw that," Melissa whispered, "and she doesn't know I told you." That's when the dynamic shifted, because now there were 3 people in this separation. Karen, me, and her sister. I pushed the phone back gently. "You understand what happens if I confront her?" I asked. Melissa nodded. "She'll accelerate." Exactly. She'd lock accounts. She'd move faster. She'd lawyer up harder. So instead of reacting, I made a decision. "I won't say a word," I told Melissa. Her eyes searched mine. "What are you going to do?" I held her gaze for a long moment. Then I said the calmest, coldest sentence of my life. "I'm going to get ahead of her." Melissa's lips parted slightly, and for the first time since 11:47 p.m., I wasn't the one playing defense. Because if Karen had been planning her escape for months, she just made one mistake. She underestimated me, and that's when the real game began. I didn't confront her. That's what she expected. That's what most men would do. Storm upstairs, slam doors, demand answers, hand her exactly what she needed, proof that the marriage was unstable. No, if Karen had been planning for months, I wasn't going to give her a head start. I went home that afternoon like nothing had happened. She was at the kitchen counter scrolling on her phone, sunlight catching the side of her face. For a moment, she looked like the woman I married. "Hey," she said casually, "how was your morning?" Normal tone, controlled, practiced. "Good," I replied, setting my keys down. "Just errands." She studied me for half a second, looking for something. Guilt, suspicion, weakness. I gave her none. That night, while she showered, I logged into our joint account for the first time in years. You know that feeling when you're about to confirm something you already know is true? My stomach dropped before the screen even loaded. There it was. Transfers. Small at first. $1,200, $2,300, $1,750. Spread out. Clean. Hard to notice unless you were looking. March, April, May. Total? Just under $48,000. Security, she called it. I stared at the numbers for a long time. Then I checked the savings account. Another $22,000 gone. Not reckless. Strategic. I should have seen the red flags, but I trusted her, and that trust was now leverage. I didn't move the money back. I didn't freeze the account. Instead, I did something smarter. The next morning, I scheduled a consultation quietly with a financial attorney Karen had never heard of. I didn't tell Melissa. I didn't tell anyone. The lawyer listened without interrupting, nodded, took notes. Has she filed yet? He asked. No. Then you have time. Time. That word felt like oxygen. He explained something Karen must have assumed I didn't know. Once divorce is officially filed, asset movement becomes far more visible and restricted. But before filing, you can reposition, legally, strategically. I walked out of that office feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. Over the next 10 days, I made quiet adjustments. Not dramatic, not obvious, but enough. I diversified accounts, shifted liquidity into protected structures, updated beneficiary designations, documented every transfer she made. I stayed quiet. I watched. Karen, meanwhile, became lighter, happier, detached. She started going out more. Gym twice a day, new clothes, new perfume. And one night, as she laughed at a text message, I noticed something else. She wasn't afraid anymore. She thought she was ahead. That was her second mistake. Because here's the truth. When someone believes they're winning, they relax. And relaxed people make mistakes. 3 weeks after the dinner announcement, Karen came home unusually cheerful. I've been thinking, she said gently. Maybe we should make this official soon. The separation. Soon. She wanted to control the timing. I looked at her calmly. If that's what you want. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She expected resistance, emotion, desperation. I gave her agreement, and that's when I saw it. The flicker, uncertainty, because the moment I didn't fight her, the power dynamic shifted. That night, at exactly 11:32 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Melissa. She's meeting him tomorrow. Him, there it was. Confirmation. And suddenly this wasn't just about money, it was about betrayal layered inside betrayal. I stared at the message. Then I typed back 2 words. Where and when? Because if Karen thought she was walking into a clean exit, she had no idea I was already waiting at the door. Melissa sent the address at 11:34 p.m., a restaurant downtown. Quiet, expensive, dim lighting, the kind of place people choose when they don't want to be seen, but still want it to feel important. What time? I typed. 7:30. She said it's closure. Closure. That word almost made me laugh. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was emotional, because I was calculating. If she was meeting him openly before filing, that meant one of 2 things. Either she felt untouchable, or she thought I was clueless. At 6:45 p.m. the next evening, I parked across the street from the restaurant. I told Karen I had a late meeting. She didn't question it, didn't even seem nervous. That hurt more than anything. At 7:28, her car pulled in. She stepped out wearing the navy dress I bought her for our 20th anniversary. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I stayed still. At 7:31, he arrived, mid-40s, confident walk, no ring. They didn't hug like strangers. They didn't greet like old friends either. They touched like people who had already crossed a line. I stared through the windshield as they disappeared inside. I thought it was a joke. The dinner announcement, the separation speech, but watching them walk in together? It wasn't a joke anymore. I didn't storm in. I didn't cause a scene. Instead, I took pictures, timestamps, location data, proof. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted leverage. After 23 years, I wasn't going to be painted as the distant husband who didn't try. If this turned legal, narrative mattered. At 8:12 p.m., my phone buzzed. Melissa. Are you there? She knew. Yes. Long pause. Then, I didn't think she'd actually go through with it. I didn't respond, because here's what was starting to bother me. Melissa seemed too involved, too aware, too eager. At 9:03 p.m., Karen and the man stepped outside. They stood close, too close. She laughed at something he said and touched his arm. I felt the final piece fall into place. This wasn't emotional confusion. This was transition. She wasn't leaving something. She was moving toward someone, and that changed everything. At 9:11 p.m., she kissed him. Not tentative, not hesitant. Certain. That was the moment I stopped feeling blindsided. Because betrayal is sharp at first, then it becomes clarity. I drove home before she did, sat in the dark living room, and waited. At 10:02 p.m., she walked in, smelled like perfume and restaurant wine. You're still up? She asked lightly. Couldn't sleep, I said. She nodded. No guilt, no fear, just calm. She thought she was ahead. She didn't know I had photos. She didn't know I had documentation of every transfer. She didn't know I'd already shifted assets into protected accounts. And she definitely didn't know something else. Earlier that afternoon, my attorney had uncovered something interesting. The separate account she opened? It wasn't just a savings account. It was linked to a joint credit application with a co-signer, the same man from the restaurant. I stared at her as she walked upstairs. That wasn't just an affair, that was financial entanglement, and financial entanglement changes the rules. At 11:22 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Melissa. What are you going to do? I looked up at the ceiling, listened to Karen moving around in our bedroom, and I typed the sentence that sealed it. I'm going to let her file first. Because once she did, everything she thought she controlled would flip, and she would finally understand I had never been asleep. Karen filed on a Tuesday, 9:14 a.m. I know the exact time because my attorney called before she did. She pulled the trigger, he said calmly. Petition filed, irreconcilable differences. Irreconcilable. That word felt almost polite compared to what I had seen outside that restaurant. At 9:27 a.m., Karen texted me. I didn't want you to hear it from someone else. I stared at the message for a long moment. I almost admired the timing. She thought she was in control of the narrative. She didn't know that the moment she filed, certain protections activated: asset transparency, discovery, subpoena power, and most importantly, scrutiny. I didn't respond emotionally. I typed back 3 simple words: understood, I'll cooperate. That's when I felt it shift, because she expected resistance. She expected negotiation. She expected me to panic. Instead, I gave her calm, and calm unsettles people who think they're ahead. By noon, my attorney had filed motions to freeze major joint transfers pending review. Not dramatic, not hostile, just procedural. But here's the part Karen didn't see coming. When the freeze went through, the bank flagged the linked credit account she had opened, the one co-signed with him. Joint financial obligations during marital dissolution raise questions, especially when funds originate from shared assets. By 3:40 p.m., her attorney requested clarification. By 4:12 p.m., they requested an emergency conference. She hadn't expected that. At 6:08 p.m., Karen walked into the house looking different. Not angry, not confident, concerned. What did you do? She asked quietly. I looked up from the kitchen table. Nothing, I said evenly. I responded. She stared at me. They're questioning the account. Which one? Silence. There it was, the moment. The realization that I knew. You've been tracking me, she said. No, I replied calmly. I started paying attention. That line landed, because here's the truth. People don't fear anger, they fear awareness. She went upstairs without another word. At 8:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. Melissa. She's furious. I didn't answer immediately. Something about Melissa's tone lately felt off. Too invested, too excited. Why are you helping me? I finally asked. 3 dots appeared, stopped, appeared again, then, because she doesn't deserve to win. Not because I deserved the truth, not because it was wrong, because she didn't deserve to win. That was different. I leaned back in my chair. You don't care about me, I typed. Long pause, then, she's always taken everything. There it was, not loyalty, resentment. Suddenly the late-night texts felt less like concern and more like positioning. You wanted her to fall, I wrote. No immediate response, then. And you were the fastest way to make that happen. The room felt very quiet after that, because now I understood something critical. I wasn't just in a marriage breakdown, I was standing between 2 sisters who had been competing their entire lives. Melissa hadn't chosen me, she'd chosen leverage. At 10:02 p.m., Karen came downstairs again. Calmer now, measured. They're asking questions about the cosigner, she said carefully. I met her eyes. You mean the man from Tuesday night? Her face went completely still. That was the moment she realized. I had seen everything, not suspected, seen, and for the first time since this began, she looked uncertain, not because of the divorce, but because the power dynamic had flipped. Upstairs, my phone buzzed again. Melissa. You told her, didn't you? I stared at the screen, because now I understood something even deeper. This wasn't just about separation. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. And I was the only one in the room who wasn't acting emotionally anymore. I typed one final message to Melissa. I don't need you anymore. Then I turned my phone face down, because the real separation wasn't happening in court. It was happening in silence. And tomorrow? Karen was going to learn what full financial disclosure really meant. The first conference wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no gavel, no television-style explosions. Just 4 lawyers, 2 long tables, and a judge who had seen this story 1,000 times before. But this wasn't going to be routine. Karen walked in 10 minutes late, not flustered, controlled. Her attorney whispered something to her as she sat down. She didn't look at me. That used to hurt. Now it told me she was recalculating. Because the moment discovery began, the numbers started talking. The co-signed credit line, the transfers, the timeline. Her attorney tried to frame it as preliminary financial planning during marital uncertainty. My attorney responded with documentation, dates, amounts, restaurant receipts, photos with timestamps. I didn't interrupt. I didn't glare. I just watched. At one point, the judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Collins," he said evenly, "were you in a financial relationship with this individual prior to filing?" Financial relationship, not romantic, financial. That's what mattered. Karen hesitated. Just long enough, and hesitation in court is louder than a confession. Her attorney quickly interjected. "We'll need time to review that, Your Honor." Time. They suddenly wanted time. The same time she thought she'd stolen from me. When the conference adjourned, Karen finally looked at me, not angry, not defensive, confused. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly in the hallway. I held her gaze. "Long enough," she swallowed. "You followed me." "No," I said calmly. "I paid attention." That line again, and it landed harder this time, because here's what changed. When she filed, she thought she was stepping into power, but once the financial entanglement surfaced, it complicated everything. In our state, dissipation of marital assets for third-party benefit during separation proceedings doesn't go unnoticed, especially when documentation exists. Her attorney pulled her aside, whispered urgently. I caught one word as they walked away. Exposure. And that's when I saw it. For the first time since that dinner announcement, she wasn't ahead. She was reacting. That night, she didn't come home. She stayed somewhere else, probably with him, but something else happened that evening. Melissa called, not texted, called. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. "You're destroying her," she said immediately. "No," I replied calmly. "She made choices." Silence on the line. "You weren't supposed to go this far," Melissa continued. There it was. Expectation. She thought I'd confront, explode, maybe even fall apart. She didn't anticipate strategy. "You wanted her exposed," I said evenly, "just not publicly." Another silence. "You don't understand," she whispered. "No," I replied, "I do." This was never about me. This was about sibling rivalry finally boiling over. I was just the trigger, and now both sisters were realizing something uncomfortable. I wasn't a pawn. I hung up without another word. The next morning, my attorney called again. "There's pressure on their side," he said. "They want to negotiate." Of course they did, because once financial misconduct enters a divorce case, leverage shifts, and leverage is everything. At 2:16 p.m., Karen finally came home. She looked tired, not glamorous, not empowered, just tired. "We need to talk," she said quietly. I nodded, sat down across from her at the same dining table where she announced the separation, the same table where I made the joke that wasn't a joke. She folded her hands. "I didn't think you'd fight this way." I leaned back slowly. "I'm not fighting," I said. "I'm responding." And that was the moment she finally understood. This wasn't about anger. This wasn't about revenge. This was about consequences. And consequences don't raise their voice. They show receipts. She exhaled shakily. "What do you want?" For the first time in months, she was asking, "What do you want?" Karen's voice wasn't sharp anymore. It wasn't defensive. It was careful, measured. For the first time since that Sunday dinner, she wasn't performing strength. She was negotiating survival. I looked at her across the same table where she had said the word separate like it was a weather update. "I want this clean," I said evenly. "No games, no hidden accounts, no third-party credit lines tied to marital funds." She flinched slightly at that. "I didn't think you'd go through my finances." I held her gaze. "You already went through mine." Silence settled between us, not hostile, just honest. She exhaled slowly. "He didn't mean for it to get complicated." He, still present in the sentence, still real. "That's the problem," I replied calmly. "He shouldn't have been involved at all." She stared at the table for a long moment. "You think I planned this?" she said quietly. "I know you did." That was the difference now. No guessing, no paranoia, just documentation. She looked up finally, and for a second I saw something that hadn't been there in months. Uncertainty. "You weren't paying attention," she said. "I am now." And that landed harder than anger ever could. By the end of the week, settlement talks were underway. Her attorney's tone had changed completely. Less aggressive, more realistic. Because once the financial paper trail surfaced, risk shifted. Spousal support discussions softened. Asset division recalculated. The co-signed credit line quietly dissolved. And something else happened. The man from the restaurant disappeared. No more joint applications. No more visible entanglements. Funny how fast romance cools when legal exposure enters the room. 3 days before we signed preliminary agreements, my phone buzzed again. Melissa. I hadn't heard from her since the courthouse hallway. "I didn't expect you to walk away this clean," she wrote. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then, what did you expect? 3 dots. Then, I thought you'd choose me. There it was, the final layer. This was never just about helping, never just about exposing her sister. Melissa thought when Karen left, I would pivot, toward her, the offer, the joke. She had turned it into a possibility, and somewhere along the way she started believing it. I was never choosing between you, I typed slowly. Long pause, then, you don't get it, she's always won. I leaned back in my chair, and finally understood something deeper than betrayal. This wasn't about marriage, it wasn't even about infidelity. It was about rivalry that started decades before I entered the picture. I was just the battlefield. The next morning, Karen and I signed the preliminary settlement. Fair division, no scorched earth, no public humiliation, just consequences. As we stood up from the table, she looked at me one last time. I underestimated you. I nodded once. Yes, not pride, just fact. That night, I walked into an empty house. Quiet, still, different. The separation she announced as power had turned into something else entirely. Clarity. At 11:47 p.m., my phone buzzed one last time. Melissa. I was serious, you know. I looked at the message. Then I did something I should have done that first night. I deleted it, because here's what I learned. The real separation didn't begin when she said the words. It began the moment I stopped reacting and started paying attention. And sometimes, the strongest move isn't choosing a side, it's choosing yourself.